Hello everyone. Today we are going to be tackling the second part of the Astrid Cosplay skirt. This is the leather panels. So let's get started. So the first thing that we need to do is make our pattern for this part of the skirt. So grab a piece of paper and make a straight line. This is going to be the baseline that we use to get all of our other measurements. I'm going to start with the bottom and I'm going to make it 3.5 inches. So you want to start with that line there in the middle, and this is super easy if you are using a clear acrylic ruler. It really does make things so much easier. So now we are going to get the length of it. My skirt is about 20 inches. And so I want this to come about an inch shorter than the full length of the skirt. So I'm going to go ahead and make a little mark at 19 inches because that is how long I want mine to be. So the top part of the skirt is smaller than the bottom part. So since we did 3.5, I'm going to do 2 inches at the top to get a really nice taper. And now you can use those two lines to connect point A to point B on each side, and you can see how it looks. And if you do need to make any adjustments, this is a time to do that. So the bottom of the skirt is originally round, so you can grab any round object, line it up on the two lines, and you can then take your pen or pencil and just trace around it so we have nice curved edges on just the bottom corners. So now we have everything we need. We have the taper, the rounded corners, and you can stop here and sew this onto the fur skirt. However, because of the way I am attaching mine, then I need to add one little detail. So I'm going to go to the top piece and I'm going to measure about 2 inches and make a mark. And then I need it to be 1 inch wide. And this is a little strip I'm going to put an eyelet in so that I can attach it to a belt and make it easier. I do this simply because it's easier for driving. I want it to look good, but at the same time, I want it to be functional for traveling because wearing a spiky skirt while you're trying to drive a car, I would imagine, would not go very well. So now the only thing that's left is cutting the pattern out, and I'll see you back here. So this is the leather fabric that I'm using. I got it from Hobby Lobby. As you can see, I am just outlining it on the fabric with a pen. I am doing this on the back of it to make it easier to cut out. And this particular fabric is supposed to be for redoing chairs and such, but I liked that it came on a 60-inch roll, and so I didn't have to worry about fold lines. So now I'm taking and cutting around it. Because I did not add any seam allowance to my pattern, I am kind of adding it as I go. And so when I was tracing out the pieces, I added enough room for the seam allowance for each of the pieces. This is very important. You don't want it to become too small. So because there are 10 panels on the skirt from the movie, you need to cut out a total of 20 of these pieces because you are going to sew them so they have a front and a back that looks nice and polished. When you get them done, then you want to place them right sides together, and you want to sew along the perimeter of the actual skirt piece, not the top piece, but you do want to leave a space in the middle so that you can turn it right side out. This is very important. You will not be able to turn it right side out from the top. So I would leave about a 3 to 4 inch gap somewhere in the middle to make this easier to do. And you will be sewing on the line that you drew on these pattern pieces. And when going around the bottom corners, don't be afraid to slow down a bit so that you get them nice and clean and crisp. When you finish sewing the pieces, you want to take your pinking shears, or if you don't have pinking shears, you can use your regular scissors and cut some notches in the curved parts at the bottom. This will help to reduce bulk because we will be top stitching, and when we turn it right side out, it will help to make those seams flat. So you want to take your scissors and cut the extra threads if you just took and pulled it, both on the top and the bottom. And after you've done that, now you get to turn it right side out. This does take a while and it can be very challenging because the material is super rigid and it doesn't really like to be moved around. But with patience, you can get it, and the more that you do them, the faster that you'll get each time. After you get it right side out, then now it's time for the top stitching. You can fold that in and pin it if you want. And for working with this faux leather, I like to adjust the stitch length, and I used 4.5 setting on my machine, and it seemed to work really well. If you want, you can use a contrasting color thread for the part that faces out. This gives it a nice effect if you're really confident with your straight lines. I am not as confident, especially since this is a decorative top stitch, so I chose a dark brown thread that perfectly matches my faux leather. And now that you're doing the top stitching, you really want to take it slow and continually readjust around these corners. I did about 1/8 of an inch top stitch around, and this also really helps it to lay flat. And if you clip the opening, that makes it a little bit easier to sew with the top stitch as well. And so you are just top stitching the skirt panel pieces. You do not have to do the top where we're going to attach them to the belt. So now trim your threads and let's go on to marking this piece. So you're going to lay it as flat as you can on the table, and you want to measure the total width because when we put the eyelets in, you want to make sure that it is completely in the middle. So I had 2 inches by a little over 3, so I'm doing it at 1 inch and a little over 1.5 inch. So you take your marker or chalk, whatever you're doing, and so because mine is 19 inches and I want an even distance between the top and the bottom, I'm going to mark 3 inches from the bottom, 3 inches from the top, and because I'm having 5 spikes, I divided the remaining length by 4, and so I got 3¼ inches, and so every 3¼ inches I'm just putting a dot, and this will give me the total of 5 spikes perfectly spaced. Now if your skirt is longer or shorter than mine, then you will need to adjust these measurements depending on how many spikes you have as well. So now I am just going to put a dot in the middle of the tag at the top. This is how we attach it to the belt, and I'm going to put an eyelet for that as well. So if you don't know how to do eyelets, we are going to head over to the workbench and do each of these. And I'll see you over there. So you want this to be on a sturdy surface such as a rock or floor, and have a piece of wood to protect your surface. Then take the punch and center it on the hole and hit it with the hammer. You want to hit it decently hard because you want it to go through both layers of the pleather. When you're done, set the hammer aside, and then you want to make sure and check to see if the punch has gone all the way through. And so one of the holes for the spikes is done. If you need to, you can clean out the punch because the circles will be stuck inside. So now it is time to move on to the next one in the same fashion. You want to center it on the dot that you made, and you want to be as precise as you can. Take your hammer, hit the punch tool. Be sure not to accidentally smack your fingers. And if for some reason it didn't already cut, you can try to pull it apart, but if not, you can take scissors to finish cutting it, or you can put the punch back in carefully and hit it a couple more times on the side that did not get fully punched. When you're done with those, then do the punch at the top for the belt. And if needed, once again, you can cut with scissors. So there are two different ways that you can put in eyelets. The first is through use of a hammer. And so for this, you will need to grab the anvil that comes with your eyelets that you purchased. You want to slip the, the good side of the eyelet through, put the washer down, and then you want to take not the punch, but this one, set it on top. It should fit in a groove, and use a hammer. You don't have to use as much force with this, but you want to hit it. As you can see, I'm using a smaller hammer, and it will create this really beautiful eyelet that is ready for use. The other way to apply eyelets is without a hammer. You need eyelet, the washer, and the pliers. And so for these, I'm going to put them where the spikes are. So you're going to start by putting the finished part through and putting the washer on top like you did for the previous one. And you can find these pretty much anywhere. I bought both sets on Amazon. And then you take your plier, make sure nothing is stuck to it. And so the pointy part goes at the top, so the side facing the washer. And so you just take and settle it in there and squish it, and you have an eyelet. It is up to you whether you decide to put the beautiful side to the front or to the back. For me, I decided to put the finished side to the back because that's where the screw is going to be towards the skirt, and the other side will just be underneath the spike anyway, so you won't really see it, but it's up to you. So we're just making sure we have the right side up before we take and we pinch. And these eyelets are okay, but I had a hard time when I bought the second pack finding ones that didn't do what they call flowering. These ones flower, and they're not really what I like because sometimes you can get sharp edges. So basically, before you buy them, just make sure you know what you're getting into. Um, I will say if you buy the ones with the anvil that you use a hammer for, you usually, at least I have never gotten them to do that. But it's always seems like the ones with the pliers are the ones that like to do that. So that is up to you and how you want to proceed. So now that you have heard me constantly talk about these 3D printed pieces of the spikes, now we are going to 3D print them and start painting them. So here there are two different sizes of spikes, the smaller size and the bigger size, as well as the bird skulls that are going to attach the leather pieces to the belt itself. So for these bird pieces, I'm taking a medium brush and I am putting it inside what the eye socket would be, and I am doing as best as I can to kind of blend it out, but it doesn't have to be perfect. So then we are going to take and do down the center seam. I'm sorry, this is a bit off camera. Um, but we are just adding some shadow. This is black metallic paint from FX, and you're going to take the sponge and just kind of blot it just to give it a shadowing effect. We are not completely painting these. As you can see, they are already a silver metallic. And so I did do around the edges too, just to give it a weathered look, because obviously Astrid is a fighter, and so she's not going to have brand new equipment every time. So here I adjusted the view to make it a little bit easier to see. And if you are wondering what kind of filament I used, this is a silver metallic. I believe it is called a silky filament. So it has a nice shine, it's very metallic-y and works perfect for this. If you don't have this color and you don't want to buy it, you can use any color and then sand it down and paint it with a metallic silver paint and then do this kind of detail work. So next to do the large spikes, I'm going to take the medium brush, but you can also take a smaller brush and just put the black paint around the rim. And there is no science to this. It doesn't have to be perfect, because then we're going to take our smaller sponge brush and we are just going to blend it up. You don't really want to get any on the tip, but about 3/4 of the way up is where you want to blend it. A nice smooth gradient if you can. And you're going to be doing this for both the large and the small spikes. If you see there's a little bit that needs touched up, you can, of course, touch it up. So as I mentioned, you want to follow the same thing for the smaller spikes. For this one, you definitely want to use a smaller brush. The medium-sized brush was just a little bit too much paint, and I ended up having to rub some of it off with a clean part of the sponge. But really, it's all up to preference and how you want it to look. If you like the light silver color, you can, of course, keep doing it that way as well. Just be prepared. This will make a mess. As you can see, I have parchment paper down and I have black on my fingers, so this will be a mess, and it will take a long time, but the results are totally worth it. So now let's go ahead and we'll let these spikes dry and we'll attach them to the leather skirt pieces. So as you can see, we have our leather piece here, and for this top one, we have a small spike. So I'm just going to set it over and put this screw in. This makes it possible to take and remove the spikes if any of them break, so I can easily replace them. And you want to be careful that you don't accidentally break the spikes as you're trying to put the screws in. I'm going to be honest with you, I don't know what size screws these are. We just had them laying around the house, and so this will require a little bit of trial and error finding the right size screw, but it is nice that it does have the hole there to make it easier to take on and off. And when it's done, it will look like that. And so if you're doing the exact copy from the cartoon, then you'll need two small spikes in the top two and two large spikes for the bottom two holes. but because this is longer and I did end up having 5 spikes, I did 2 small and 3 large. And so you can see how it's really coming together. So now let's attach this to the belt and add our skulls. So these are the screws that I'm using that will go through the belt, the leather part that we sewed, and the bird skulls. So you're going to start with your belt. This one I got at Walmart. I am putting 2 holes between where I'm putting them in. Because the screw is wider than the hole, I'm going to start by tightening the screw through the belt loop. And this I can just do by hand. So then we are going to take our leather piece and we are just going to put the screw through the grommet and take our 3D printed piece and put that through the hole in the back, which is for the screw. And then we are just going to tighten it with our screwdriver. And you want to get it as tight as you can because you don't really want them to shift, but not so tight that you end up breaking the 3D printed piece. And so when it's all done, you just want to straighten it out. And this is what it looks like. And it is secured, and you can detach them if you want to change it up. And so I skipped 2 because the bird head covers 3 different holes. Thank you so much for watching, and don't forget to check out my next video where we tackle accessories.